We're here at Université de Montréal at the International Conference Street Politics in the Age of Austerity. And joining me is Dr. Cristina Flesher Fominaya of the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. She's a professor of sociology and a founder and co-editor of Interface, a global open access journal on social movements. Dr. Flesher Fominaya has been studying the Spanish anti-austerity movements and will be sharing a little bit on her research findings with us today. Thank you for being with us, Cristina.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
If you could tell us a little bit about the background and the origins and spatial locations of the Spanish anti-austerity movements.
Okay, well, the original idea for 15M, or 15th of May as it's known, or the Indignados movement, came from a group of different collectives of mostly young people who were mobilizing around different issues in Madrid, and they had been really inspired by Arab Spring. They were inspired by the Saucepan Revolution in Iceland, by what was happening in Greece, student protests in Europe, and so on. And they decided that it would be a really good thing for them to also mobilize in Spain and for people to rise up against the conditions that a country is living through. And so they put a call out for this protest for Real Democracy Now! For the 15th of May in 2011, and it became known as 15M. And it started in Madrid, and it spread very quickly to Barcelona and to many other cities around Spain. So it really took off, I'd say.
So it's been inspired largely from outside the country?
Well, let's just say in terms of outside influences or trigger influences, yes, there was definitely a feeling of being inspired by things that were happening elsewhere. But it's really important to note that the ability of this movement to mobilize is based on pre-existing networks that have been active in Madrid, for example, in the case of Madrid, for a very long time, and in the case of 15M in particular, there are a lot of different collectives that were involved that were already mobilizing around housing issues, around youth precarity issues, against university reforms. So there's a whole host of things that these activists had been involved with previously. And you can really see that in the manifesto that the DRY, or DRY, the Real Democracy Now!, very shortly after 15M, they published a manifesto. And this long list of demands reflects a list of concerns that activists have had in Spain for a long time, and you can really see that reflected in the manifesto. But what's interesting, or what's new or different about it, is that although, yes, you can see these demands that were existing for a long time, the top demands of the manifesto are really about government reform and reforming the political system, fighting against corruption, political corruption, and demanding that politicians really respect the basic rights of Spaniards that are already enshrined in the Constitution. So in that sense, it's quite unusual because not actually asking the government to do something new or different. They're asking the government to actually do what they're supposed to do according to the Spanish Constitution.
You stressed in your research the kind of evolving nature of the Spanish protest movements. And so when did these movements really begin in the Spanish context, and why are they manifesting themselves now in 2011, 2012, 2013?
Well, why they're manifesting now has to do with trigger and precipitating events and sort of the crisis and the context. So there are different ways you could answer that question, but the question was, but why are they manifesting now? Or the earlier part of the question was,
if it's an evolving movement over time.
The evolution. Sorry, yes, the evolution of the movements over time. Well, you can trace. I mean, one of the things that people really notice about the Indignados, I think, is really incredible about them, and it is the ability to sort of these public assemblies of 5,000 people in a plaza, and to try to manage that decision-making process among 5,000 people in a deliberative, horizontal way. But that's not something that you can just do overnight. And so that's kind of deliberative practice and deliberative democracy has been evolving in Spanish autonomous movements since the very least the early 1980s. And of course, an autonomous organizing tradition we can trace right back to the beginning of the 19th century with anarchist movements in Spain and so on and elsewhere. So depending on where you want to start the line of continuity, you can start all the way back with anarchists, or you can start more recently with neighborhood associations in the 70s in Madrid, and then later squatted centers. A coordinator called Lucha Autónoma that was all about autonomous movement and neighborhood practice and so on. So, yeah, feminist movements, anti-militarist movements, environmentalist movements, and of course the big precursor, the global justice movement.
So in the current protests, are they mainly protesting for similar goals and aims, or are they more diverse in their objective?
I don't think there's a similarity in the sense that the twin key demands are a deep questioning of the neoliberal economic model and the consequences that it's had, coupled with a demand that the political elites act on behalf of the citizens and not on behalf of economic elites and on behalf of themselves and other political elites. So in that sense, that's really the same as the global justice movement at its core. But the difference is that now we have a tremendous global financial crisis that has hit Spain really, really hard. And it's not just about critiquing models, it's about actually saying, you're imposing austerity on us, this is having real human consequences, people are losing their homes, and why is the government using billions of taxpayer euros to bail out the banks and let them carry on with business as usual when thousands of people are losing their homes, people are unemployed, people are committing suicide because they can't support their families, and so on. So it's really throwing up the human cost of the crisis and demanding that the bill for the fraudulent practices of the banks not be passed on to the citizens. And that's really, I think, what people are rising up about, and that resonates with a really huge amount of Spanish public, which is why this particular movement has had such popular support.
And has the movement had any impact on the political scene in Spain?
Well, political scene, do you mean sort of the established political parties? To me, I don't really see that the established political parties responding in any real way or engaging in any real way with the demands of the citizens and of the protests. The Popular Party now is embroiled in corruption scandals, which have made the pages of UK press and US press around the world. They've leaked the fact that there are separate ledgers that people have been paying extra salaries out of or double salaries out of. But really the only way that I see that they've responded is with repression, increased repression, and unfortunately when you have a global crisis there are always people who are going to take advantage of that fact to try to dismantle the gains that have been over time. So we see a lot of attacks on labor laws or reforms of labor laws, some of which may, I don't know, I'm not an economist and I'm not an expert. It may be that some of that is necessary, but it's quite clear that in many cases it's a matter of really taking advantage of that situation to dismantle the social welfare system. So they're privatizing hospitals in Madrid, for example, which has long been a staple of one of the gains post-transition in Spain has been the creation of a really strong welfare state, and that's being dismantled now with this pretext of economic crisis and austerity.
And what is the current state now? Are there still protests ongoing? Do you foresee it continuing into the future?
Well, yeah, there are protests ongoing, but I think, it's typical with cycles of contention that you see very visible mass protests that emerge. And then you see a sort of shift back to more local assemblies, local neighborhood activities, and so on. So it's really hard to predict when the next cycle will hit. But I think that people are still very active, and I'm sure that there will be more protest action in the future. I just couldn't tell you exactly when.
Dr. Flesher Fominaya, thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.